Well, look at this audience today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this Friday afternoon to talk politics. And not just any politics, the politics of California. We are facing an affordability crisis in our state. We are fighting against Trump. I think you will hear a lot of those themes here today. But one of the things that I want for all of you to just kind of lean into is, how are the candidates different? Because they're all Democrats, and they are all fighting for your votes. But how we distinguish them is just as important as how they are alike and how they align with your values, California values, and Democratic values. So I am so excited and privileged to be here tonight to welcome to the stage the 9 major gubernatorial candidates for the office of Governor of California. I also want to say hi to my dad, who's watching in the audience over the internet, because we can't accommodate everybody here in the Commonwealth Club, and it's so exciting that we are able to broadcast this via the Commonwealth Club so that as many people as possible can have this kind of access as well. So our first candidate to the stage needs no introduction. I will introduce her, though. It's Katie Porter. Katie, come on out. Welcome.
Thank you.
Go and have a seat. So just as a brief introduction, Katie Porter is a consumer protection attorney and law professor, former member of Congress who famously flipped a red seat in Orange County. She's known for her oversight work and focus on economic accountability, a single mom, 3 kids, trying to juggle a campaign with getting to water polo tournaments. She is also well known for dressing down corporate America with just a marker and a whiteboard. It's Katie Porter. Welcome. So talk a little bit about California's affordability crisis and how your experience as a single mom of 3 has really impacted your view of what we need to do in California.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Nancy. So let's talk about affordability. Affordability for me is not a talking point. It's actually been my life's work. So long before I got started in politics, I studied families in bankruptcy. Really the sort of bottom, the toughest place to see that affordability challenge. People push there because of medical debt, cost of living. And then I ran for then Attorney General Kamala Harris, a statewide foreclosure and eviction prevention program. So for me, affordability is not a talking point. It's not a new issue. It is really in many ways the issue, because when families can't take care of themselves, everything else becomes hard, including participating in our democracy. So I think affordability is the touchstone issue, and I don't think we can afford, get it, it's a pun, to nibble around the edges on affordability. So I get it, I push a shopping cart, I say no to $9 boxes of cereal. I know what a gallon of milk costs, both the generic and the name brand. I'll let you guess which one I buy. But we really have to take aim at the big stuff. So what is the big stuff? The big stuff is housing. The big stuff is childcare or elder care. And the big stuff increasingly is healthcare. These are the big expenses. So if you can take down someone's housing, and I have a plan to do this, by 10% or 20%, that's like wiping out a huge swath of their monthly bills in terms of what it does for their budget. So that's why housing is my #1 issue.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. So housing, what is your plan? Because I know that Elizabeth Warren is one of your mentors and that she just recently endorsed you. Congratulations on that endorsement. So what is the plan? What is the plan to take people's housing costs down 10, 20% when in California we have underbuilt by significant margins for a very, very long period of time?
So it's going to be more than one strategy. I think anyone who says it's just one thing, I think that is not how housing works. We've been at this for a while. We've dug ourselves into a hole, and we're going to have to do a lot of things differently. So let me tell you some of my touchstones. 1, time is money. That is absolutely true in housing. The RAND Institute did a terrific study showing that Colorado, a state with good environmental protections, good worker protections, builds apartment housing 22 months, almost 2 years faster than we do. If we could just build at the same speed that they do, that would take 10 or 20% off the cost of market rate housing apartments. That's huge. That's not $5 extra a week. That is hundreds and hundreds of extra dollars for families. So we have to speed it up. The cost of the interest rate, the cost of the uncertainty of the project, labor goes up, supplies go up. All those things happen when we take too long. Second, we have to innovate on housing. We are the home of innovation. We're so proud of that in California, righteously so. But housing is one of the few things that today, until very, very recently, we were still building today in the same way, with the same materials, with the same kinds of designs that we were 100, 200 years ago. So there's a lot of opportunity to innovate, materials, architecture, but also housing finance needs innovation. So after the foreclosure crisis, people realized we don't want 0% down, we don't want these predatory mortgages. Absolutely, I spent my career fighting those loans. But then we jumped to things like a 20% down payment, which the research is really clear is bigger than it needs to be to create really solid, sustainable homeownership. So we also need to think about things like long-term leases so that people who have raising kids but are also renters can stay in the same neighborhood, can stay near their child care provider, can stay in the same elementary school. So that is going to be a big thing. Every locality in California is going to have to build. Is going to have to be part of this. Exactly what that looks like is going to be wildly different. So we've seen San Diego have success with ADUs. My backyard could barely hold a doghouse. I could definitely not fit an ADU back there. So it's going to look different everywhere, but every part and pocket of California needs to be part of the housing solution.
So then, as governor, what would you do about municipalities that are building resistant?
Yep. So I represented coastal Orange County, including Huntington Beach, so I am familiar with these jurisdictions. So a couple things. One, I think we should have a statewide application, a standardized piece of paper. Because right now we're seeing things get rejected from like you stapled it, you didn't paper clip it, you forgot this line. So one application, that'll help us collect better data on how long it's taking. I think we need to require localities to disclose within 30 days of getting that application to build, what are the fees going to be? And that's that, right? You can't keep adding on fees. You can't keep delaying. Most things that we try to build housing-wise in California, most of them actually eventually get built. But all of that time is adding to that cost. So I think we need to have clarity up front about that. I also think we need to set realistic housing goals. I'm a mom of 3, you mentioned. I'm a parent of 3 teenagers, so it's like running for governor is like what I do to relax. But, when I tell my son Paul, like, I would love for you to get all A's, it isn't a very meaningful conversation because that's not going to happen. When I say to Paul, could you just deal with the C, right? He's like, I can, Mom. I can get on that. So our housing goals for too long have been totally aspirational. Nobody's going to meet their goal, so nobody bothers to try. Our next governor is going to have the opportunity to lead our 7th generation RHNA process, allowing jurisdictions and localities to set those housing goals. They have to be real because we need to demonstrate progress on this.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about that affordability piece. There's housing, and then there's utilities, right? And so California has one of the highest utility rates in the country, second only, I think, to Hawaii. And so in terms of utilities, these bread and butter kind of costs and parts of a household budget, what is your view on taking down the temperature on utilities and whether or not we should make it easier for municipalities to go into public power?
So I think municipalities that want to do public power, we should create that pathway. I think the idea that you could municipalize something like PG&E is the amount of, it's trillion. It's just not doable for any one entity to kind of do that. But there are pathways for localities to have more choice, and there may be opportunities for some of those localities, especially as new forms of energy come online, to choose to do their own thing. But a lot of the wildfire resilience work that we need to do, a lot of the storage and transmission that we need to do is going to have to come from our large investor-owned utilities. They just as a capacity there to move. Our energy energy demand is going to grow by 50% in the next 20 years. The biggest driver of that is predicted to be electric vehicle charging, and the second biggest is data centers. So we have got to be building more power. So that means if municipalities want to come online and take some of that off, there's going to be plenty of demand for our utilities right now. You mentioned how do we take the temperature down, and I caught that reference. But I think one of the issues I will say is that trust in the CPUC is so deeply eroded. If you would have told me running for governor that the number one government agency or entity that people would complain to me about was the CPUC, it's not the DMV, it's not the tax board, it's not unemployment, and these are all things that could use a little work. It's the CPUC. So the governor's going to have to do, I think, a hard reset on that trust. One of the reasons I don't take corporate contributions, and other than a self-funder, I'm the only Democrat in this race that does not, is I think the next governor is going to need the credibility on utilities, on energy, on insurance, to say, I'm doing this because this is the very best path for California. And nobody can say they were bought and paid for. And I think that credibility is going to be important as we have conversations about how to chart a path forward.
Okay, well, since you brought up the topic of billionaires in corporate America, what is your view on how much, who should be contributing to California? You know, we have this billionaires tax that's coming online for the November ballot. What are your views on that measure in particular, and who should be helping to fund California?
So I think all forms of taxation should be progressive. We have that already with our income tax. We actually don't have a progressive corporate tax. I think that's a revenue option that we could look at. And so right now, if you earn $1 a profit in your corporation, you pay the same rate as a company that makes billions of dollars of profit. I think there's an ability to kind of have a scaled progressive corporate tax. That's on the table because we are going to need to think about revenue, especially with Trump. I don't support this particular billionaire's tax, and I have been crystal clear about that. And I think if you've seen me in a hearing, you know that I like to eat cheating people, cheating CEOs for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I am unafraid to take on the rich and powerful. If you cheat Americans, I am coming for you. But to be clear, that's not what this tax is about, right? It's a one-time tax. Let me ask you, do we have one-time needs for transit or food assistance or education funding or health care? No. So doing a one-time thing when we have ongoing revenue needs doesn't make a lot of sense to me. This is going to be tied up in litigation for years, and I know they have made efforts to close loopholes here, but I want to be very clear. These particular kinds of taxes have a very, very bad track record. They typically deliver less than half of what is promised and expected. So I want to work in conjunction with the legislature to come up with a legislative revenue proposal that we can take time to socialize and then put it on the ballot and do that work in 2027. I think a one-time tax doesn't fit the reality of we have long-term needs in California.
I like that answer. Now let's circle back to, what you were doing back in Congress and things that are happening at the federal level that our next governor is going to have to deal with. And so what are your thoughts about how to deal with Trump and ICE and the way that they have been terrorizing hardworking people in the state of California and elsewhere?
So, a governor's very first duty, I think any elected's really first duty at any level of government, is to keep people safe. That is so fundamental. And I want to be really clear about this. What ICE is doing, attacking people, killing people on the streets, it's not just making people who are undocumented unsafe or people who they perceive to be immigrants unsafe. It's making all of us less safe, because that kind of violence and lawlessness, that immoral and unconstitutional action from those who are trying to wear the mantle of law enforcement only makes the job of supporting our law enforcement and helping them do their work of community safety, it's terrible. They don't want this either, because they know this is not where the real safety work that we need to be doing is. So I think we want to try to keep ICE out of California as much as we can. There's a lot of creative creative proposals to do that. The single most important thing we can do is win back the House of Representatives in 2026.
Amen.
And I did that in 2018. I was part of that group who stepped up to run when Trump was elected the first time, flipping an area that had been represented by a Republican for 75 years. And it's still blue today. So that is a big focus of mine as governor. I think we absolutely need someone who's whip smart and tough on policy. But this is also a political job. And I know what it's like to campaign and try to flip a seat and have the governor be wind at your back. And it really, really helps. I'm a good grassroots fundraiser. I want to do that for these candidates who are trying to win these House seats. We worked hard to pass Prop 50, but Prop 50 isn't the House. Prop 50 is the gateway, the opportunity to get there. So June 3rd, if I have your email address, count on me. I will be in touch because I will be trying to help organize for texting, for door knocking all across this state to win those House seats.
Well, it's really nice to hear you talk about that because, essentially a Democratic governor is the leader of our party in our state. And so it's very refreshing for me to hear that from you. So talk a little bit, we have just a couple more minutes left. Talk a little bit about how you have been reaching across the aisle or out to people or organizations that may not have supported you in the past. Yeah.
So I am the original Chatty Cathy. Even though I'm a chatty Katie, I will talk with anyone. And what I'm really trying to do in this campaign and what I want to do as governor is be the governor of good ideas. And nobody's got a monopoly on that. I'm a professor. That's what I do for a living. And in academia, ideas are the coin of the realm, right? You take them, you test them, you look at data, you see if they work. So I'm going to have conversations with anybody that will sit down with me and be able to teach me. There is a lot to learn as governor. I would not give up the year that I have been in this race for anything. I feel like I have learned so much, and I am really grateful to all the people that have taken time to educate me about policies. There are issues that the state faces that are just not federal issues, and you need that depth. So I've been very gratified. I called people who spent big against me in past races, and they picked up the phone. And they said, this meant a lot to me. They said, it says a lot about you that you called. And I said, well, it says a lot about you that you answered. And I think that is really an important way to go about this. When I was in Congress, I did a lot of bipartisan work. Even after my last couple months in the Congress, I wasn't coming back to the House. I did 2 bipartisan bills in that period, including one on voting. Can you imagine that I got a vote by mail bill through that Congress as we now see them passing the SAVE Act? It took a lot of shaking hands and talking to dudes, Republicans, and to get it done. But I did it. I mean, Doug LaMalfa, who recently passed away, was a really good partner to me on one of my bills. Doug did not think climate change was real. But you know what? He wanted to make permitting better. And that's what my goal was, and that was enough. So I think you have to take those opportunities and those moments where you can. You don't compromise your values. That is not what it means to cooperate. Mm-hmm. It's not about compromising your values. It is about finding where your values overlap.
Okay. Last question. What is the endorsement that you are most proud of? No shade to anybody else who's endorsed her in the room. Okay.
My 17-year-old son recently said, well, Mom, I've heard the other people now, and I guess I'll be voting for you.
All right, Katie Porter, everyone. All right, thank you. Okay, thanks.
That was terrific.
Okay.
My website's katieporter.com. If you'd like to follow us, it's at Katie Porter CA. We'd love to have you engage. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. And then, so next up to the stage, we have Tom Steyer, who moved to San Francisco in 1986, started a hedge fund that grew to $36 billion. Mr. Steyer, come on up. See, I told you this is going to be rapid fire, so I hope you have some pen and pencils and paper ready. Take notes. Started a hedge fund, left that 15 years ago to turn to a life of public service. You funded ballot measures, youth political engagement projects, and a nonprofit community bank. I think for most people, sometimes the question about Tom Steyer is why. So why did you leave a successful industry, something that you had created from scratch, super, super successful, making you very, very wealthy? Why did you leave that?
So,
Yeah.
do you hear me? So the question about why I did it actually is the question is why did I start the company? Because if you actually know my family, you'll understand that my family is actually about service and not about business. So that my mom was a teacher in public schools and in prison. My dad was a Navy vet. My wife is sitting over there, standing over there.
Kat, we actually have a seat for you over here if you'd like to come and sit.
And she spent 40 years as an activist for economic and environmental justice. My brother has spent 40 years as an advocate for at-risk kids. So the real question to ask is, what inspired me to start a business in the first place, since no one in my family has ever been in business? And I'm not sure the answer to that question. But what I do know is I ran it for 27 years, and it was more successful than I could have imagined, and I was desperately unhappy. And I was unhappy because I felt as if I was leading a very narrow life that didn't fulfill my desire to have a positive impact on the planet. And even leaving meant leaving billions of dollars on the table. And in fact, Kat and I took a pledge to give away the bulk of our money that we did have while we were alive. So the real question from my standpoint was, I didn't want to die and not have lived. And living meant, for me and for our family, participating in the community, contributing, giving back, in a simple metaphor, leaving the campsite better than you found it. And I felt like, why would it be a success to have a big fat balance sheet and have done things? I just felt like it wasn't going to serve. It didn't serve me, and in fact, the more I saw of it, the less happy I was. And if you understand my campaign, we talk about affordability, and it is about the fact that Californians can't afford to live in California. But underlying that is the point that working people have basically been getting screwed for 45 years in California and across the United States. And so my campaign is about that, but that's actually the reason that I walked away from my business, was because I felt like that is not what I think of as the life that I wanted to lead. That is not the person who I want to be. Those are not the values that I want to live out and espouse. And so for me, this campaign, the ability to connect, I took on a whole bunch of stuff in the interim. I'm sure we'll talk about it.
Yeah. But we only have 15 minutes.
Okay, so I'm going to go on. But that's the real point is, for me, the value that I wanted out of life, a lot of it came from our family. A lot of it came from the people I love, but it also came from being a useful person, giving back, being of service in a way that when I think about myself, I can be proud of myself.
That's very admirable. So why does that now turn into you wanting to run for governor? Why do you need to be governor if you can, affect things through the ballot measure, the ballot process, do your own nonprofit engagements? Why being governor?
So obviously we're at a crisis in this state and in this country, but I think I want to define that crisis a little more clearly, which is this. I see this crisis as a very straightforward struggle and fight between what I think of as extraordinarily rich special interests and working people. And I look at it and my feeling is I have taken on the special interests multiple times at the ballot box, in props, oil companies, tobacco companies, and out-of-state companies not paying their state income tax. And I won every time. But the point is, everybody knew they were doing it. Right now, at least I'm trying to get people to know, I'm guaranteeing that we're going to go after a corporate real estate tax loophole that's worth over $20 billion a year to California. It's just a loophole. But in order to do it, you're going to have to take on people who are not paying $20 billion worth of state tax every year, and they like not paying that. And the tobacco companies like not paying taxes. And so you said, why do I think it's me? I don't owe anyone anything. I'm absolutely committed to the idea that working people need a better deal very broadly. And I'm willing to take on very well-funded special interests who are not going to like me. I'm talking about introducing competition to our electric monopolies. They don't like me. And you've got to be willing not to take the money and to be willing to stand up to them and really push back. And that's what's going on in this election, and that's why I'm running.
Okay. So you can clap. It's okay. So let's talk about those big corporate interests and CEOs in the state that make a lot of money. What do you think about the CEO tax that is going to be on the ballot?
So I'm not sure. That's not normally how people refer to it. Some people refer to it the billionaire tax.
Billionaire tax, yes.
Okay. Look.
Sorry, we have a different CEO tax.
I know. That's why I was just trying to get it right.
Billionaire tax. We're talking about the whole state.
So look, we are short, particularly because the Trump administration has thrown 1 to 3 million people off Medi-Cal who still will need health care. We are going to be very short of money in the foreseeable future. That's one of the big reasons, but not the only reason I'm proposing closing this tax loophole on corporate real estate, because we need the $20+ billion. The billionaires tax is specifically designed to respond to this need, and there is a real need, and they are doing something that actually does respond. It's a one-time tax for an ongoing problem, so it doesn't actually deal with the problem. It just deals with it one time. And the way that it's conceived is not exactly the one that if we put together a coalition, which is the way I like to do things, people would have come up with it. So I agree with it in principle, and I believe that it is necessary. And I think if you look at how much tax people pay in the different tax brackets, you'll see that this is by no means unfair. By no means unfair. The idea of the richest people in this state paying more absolute dollars is not unfair by any stretch of the imaginations. These corporations, the idea that they should pay fair real estate taxes, that's not unfair. And so to a large extent, I applaud what they're trying to do. I would do it differently. And by the way, it's not on the ballot. They're collecting signatures now, but at this point, it's a theoretical question.
So then what would you do differently then? How would you structure it differently?
Well, I think, so I've won these 3 ballot props. And in my mind, the way for a governor or the way for a leader to work in California or anywhere else is to have new ideas, is to propose things, but it's also to be a good listener. So if I go out to do a tax like that, I would go around and get all the different people in the coalition who I would expect to support it and to make it happen. One person doesn't make this happen. You know, when we did 2012, we closed this tax loophole for out-of-state corporations and weren't paying their state taxes. We did it in conjunction with the labor movement. And so they were worried about paycheck protection, if you'll remember. We went door to door. The flyers had both of them. It was very much a partnership and a coalition. And if we're going to change something, we're not going to change huge things. I mean, I proposed, we need structural change in several parts of California. No one person does that. That's got to be done in coalition, actually listening and bringing in other people's ideas. When we took on the oil companies, my partner was George Shultz, because we wanted to have a well-respected, honest, decent Republican, which he was, a lovely guy and good friend. And George always used to say, if you want me in at the landing, ask me in at the takeoff. When you say, how would I do it? I would ask people in at the takeoff and listen to what they said to make sure that the details were right, that we weren't missing points, and that we were being fair-minded across the board. That's how I like to do things. That's how we will do things. You still have to propose new ideas. You still have to have, be able to have a new framework. But the truth is you need a coalition. You need to treat partners like partners. That means listening and respecting other people.
It's Coalition Building 101. Yes, it right. Is. And so let me ask you, because affordability is top of mind for many voters, many Californians that can't afford to make ends meet. Part of that is housing, right? And you have an ambitious goal to build 1 million homes in 4 years. I mean, California is now a state where out-migration is our year after year, and we've lost, I think, 1.9 million people in the last decade, and we continue to lose hundreds of thousands of people net in California. So housing, how do we build more housing?
So, the number one issue for people's budgets is housing, just so you guys know. It's up to 50% of what people are paying out for their take-home pay, which is way, way, way too high. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that housing prices are too high, rents are too high, and we're not building, and it's been going on for a couple of decades. So how do we actually get this? I always say there's no silver bullet to housing. It's all about silver buckshot. So what does that really mean? It means streamlining permitting. Part of that changed last year, which was with CEQA reform to make things move faster, and that's something I supported. Part of it is zoning, actually being zoned to the places where people need houses and where it can be done in an environmentally sensitive way. Part of it is the cost per square foot, because it's very expensive to build here, but there's new technology available to bring down the costs by a third, and maybe when we get to it in size, a half, bringing things into alignment. So those are the ways we do housing. Now, let me add 2 more things to this. One is, it is really important who gets the housing, that we do low-income housing, that we do occupational housing, that we do ADUs, that we're taking care. I just said, working people have been getting screwed for 45 years. The answer is not to build a lot of McMansions. The answer is to build housing that people can afford and get people in it. And just so you know, I'm for rent control, because the rents are so high because failed public policy that stopped people from building for 2 decades. Okay, failed public policy requires public policy. In the short run, we need rent control so people can afford to live here. In the long run, we need to build a lot more less expensive housing with an eye on a whole bunch of details that we don't have enough time to go into, but I promise you, I have looked at 1,000 income statements to see how to make things profitable. I will look at these income statements really carefully, line by line, so we can bring down the cost of housing so young people can buy houses, so rents can go down, and so people can afford to live in California.
Okay, let's talk a little bit. I think this may be the last thing that we talk about. Important people who cannot afford to live in the places where they work, teachers. And I know it's probably something that's very near and dear to you, but also I am a follower of political Instagrams. And I know that you were recently at a rally for teachers that were striking in San Francisco not too long ago. And in that Instagram video, you said, teachers, we need to pay our teachers more. And I don't think that there is a single public school kid parent who will disagree with you. We need to pay our teachers more. But when the districts have not enough funding, that there are many districts across the state that are facing fiscal cliffs that are in state oversight right now and have very little to give without actually laying off teachers or reducing the size of their footprint. What is your policy going to be around education and how education money is spent and sent down to the districts?
So, of course, this is a fair question because we keep asking cities and counties to provide services and not having the money to actually provide the services we're demanding. But that's why I'm talking so much about closing corporate tax loopholes. That's why I'm talking about getting rid of this. We're calling it the Trump tax loophole because he owns a bunch of commercial real estate and is not paying what we think of as a remotely fair tax basis in California. But that's $22 billion a year to localities. Those dollars actually go to local cities and counties for education specifically and for healthcare. And why is that really important in terms of education? Because of course, we want to pay teachers fairly, and of course, we want better teacher-student ratios, all those things, but it's all about money. I'm the only person running who's saying, I understand that, and I'm going to bring a bunch of money to the state specifically to answer that question. And I want to also refute a commonly held position in California that we spend so much money on education and these teachers are so well paid that, really it's ridiculous that we don't have the number one education system in the state. Because one of the things I've said is we need to get back to being a top 10. On a cost of justice basis, we are the 31st best funded per pupil in the United States. 31st out of 50. So when you think about us spending so much on schools and so much on teachers, they're having trouble recruiting teachers. And it's not because they're overpaid. The truth is we need to fund education better and we need to drive down costs.
Great.
And I'm bringing the money to fund it better, and I'm talking very specifically about how we'll drive down the biggest costs in this state, which are housing, healthcare, and electricity.
All right. Tom Steyer, everyone. All right. Thank you. All right. Next on your bingo cards, we have Congressman Eric Swalwell, who is a member of Congress in the East Bay. He has been a member for 12 years, a former prosecutor with the Alameda County District Attorney's Office, and a Dublin City Councilman. House impeachment manager after January 6th. Okay. Also, dad of 3. So, Eric, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me back here.
Of course, of course. So let's talk about Trump. Let's talk about Trump first and what you think California's role should be in fighting the Trump administration and intrusions by ICE.
Well, we just learned today that he's been illegally taxing all of you for the last year.
That is true.
And miraculously, at least once the system has held. But the next governor of California has 2 jobs. First, to put a firewall up between Trump and his ICE agents and his troops and the people of our state. And 2, to be the CEO of lowering costs. On the first piece, I've been taking this guy on, going on offense for the last 10 years. I worked with Adam Schiff initially in the Russia investigation and then was a part of both impeachments. I have the only case that has survived the new presidency. It's me and the January 6 officers. I lead the January 6 committee today on the Democratic side, something that shouldn't even exist because we saw it with our own eyes. And so as governor, I will make sure that I'm on offense on behalf of Californians so that the most vulnerable are not on defense. Because what I've heard from Californians, and I was at a climate summit a couple weeks ago with most of the candidates here, and one person told me in the green room, he said, climate used to be my number 1 issue until now. And I was shocked to hear that. He said, now it's democracy. And what I've heard from Californians is, first you have to tell me how you're going to protect me. How are you going to protect our friends and neighbors who run through the fields and factories where they work? How do you protect women who are being dragged by their hair through our streets and put in unmarked vehicles? How do you protect a nurse named Preddy and a mom named Good? You have to do that first before they want to hear about your housing plan, your health care plan, your environmental plan. And I offer to the people of California a proven record of being a fighter protector for the last 10 years.
Thank you. Thank you for your work. Now, in terms of the thing that I think is top of mind for a lot of Californians, which is affordability, housing, utilities, childcare, healthcare. What is your thought about how you, as the governor of California, would help resolve some of these issues for Californians?
Well, I started as a governor who gets it because I lived it. I lived in 13 different houses and went to 11 different schools before I graduated high school. And my mom worked as many jobs as she could find during the day to pay for as many groceries she could afford at night. My dad was a police officer. I'm 45 years old. I'm married to a very hardworking wife. We have 3 little kids. We have parents who are aging and have their own health care concerns. I see with this wide aperture, also as someone who has student loan debt still today, I see why Californians work hard. And so as a day one Democrat, my priority is to bring down the cost of rent and housing. And so I have said on day one, I'm going to put a shot clock in place on every agency that approves housing, from the fire marshal to coastal to Fish and Game. And I'm going to tell them they have 90 days to approve or deny every outstanding application so we can surge supply, new apartments, new condos, new single-family homes, but surge supply, put more certainty out there so that we can immediately start to bring down costs. I think this is a housing election, and my focus, my priority is going to make sure that in California, you can take your first job, have your first kid, and buy your first home, God forbid, in the same decade.
So what do you think are the real blockers, aside from state agencies? What are the real blockers to building more housing in California?
Well, when it comes to housing, California is a blue state held down by red tape. And it takes way too long to approve new housing projects. And I'm not just hearing this across California. I'm going to draw on experience as somebody who was a planning commissioner and a city council member in Dublin. The Dublin, by the way, that you know of right now is not the Dublin where I grew up. Where I grew up in the 90s, everyone around us in the wealthier communities called us Scrublin. And I swear I didn't carry it like a chip on my shoulder at all. It was a place of low income and lower expectations. And I got the hell out of there on a soccer scholarship, went back east, stayed there, never thought to come back home until I was told by a high school mentor who got on the city council that the city was in renaissance. And as he described it, he said, we're building like crazy. So I went back to Dublin, worked as a prosecutor, as you pointed out, in Oakland. But the real work was working with developers and builders to build not just new housing and profiting off the backs of the development, but for them to provide new schools, new firehouses, new police stations, new ballparks, new community centers. And pretty soon, because of that type of investment in housing, the streets got safer, the schools got better, and the quality of life went up. We also worked with small businesses to get rid of every fee and every permitting process that stood in their way. For example, a sewer connection fee could be $65,000, $75,000. And we wanted to really attract restaurants and retail. And so we would waive the sewer connection fee. The high school that I graduated from in 1999, 25% of us went off to college. Today, that same high school, which was renovated, 96% of the kids go to college. So I saw how we went from Scrublin to Dublin, and I want to do that across the state.
That's great. In 1999, I was graduating from law school, by the way, so I'm just a little bit ahead of you. One thing, I'm a parent to young kids, you're a parent to young kids, cost of daycare, the state of public education. What, as governor, do you think you can do to help alleviate that huge concern for a lot of parents?
Well, I know as a parent that nothing else happens in our house. No one goes to work, no other activity is attended to until you know that daycare is provided. But I also know that for most California families, it's eating up more and more of your household income. What I would like to see us do is increase the number of people who are eligible through the child care provider opportunities we have in California. We went from a TK3 model and expanded how kids, can go to school earlier. That's a great idea, but I'd like to make sure that more community programs are eligible to receive dollars to do that work. I'm hearing from public educators about the strain of being asked to do a lot of this work. By the way, when you have a 3-year-old, you're doing potty training, and a lot of our educators are not trained to do that. So if we could surge more resources to some of our local child care providers, in-home providers who do that work, I've seen the value of that. And so first and foremost, I think just having more providers brings down the cost. And then on education, I was with the teachers 2 weeks ago here on the strike line, and it really occurred to me in the most poignant way, as you drive through San Francisco, this is one of the wealthiest cities in the world. And yet we have CEOs who make $50,000 an hour and teachers who can barely afford to survive. And they're commuting from the hinterlands, and they're being asked to give up more. So my job as governor is to not keep going to the taxpayers and saying, we're going to put this on you, but to increase the revenue that we find in the state. One thing that we're going to do, because the state has had war declared against it by the federal government, is to stand up a California research fund. We have lost cancer funding, port security funding, hydrogen fuel station funding, and when you lose funding like that, it means all funding's at risk, from healthcare to public education. What I'm going to do is bet on Californians, and I'm going to dispatch global ambassadors to the capital markets all over the world. We're going to go to Asia, to Europe, the capital markets who will invest in California, deploy that revenue into California companies, and the revenue that comes back as we take either first mover equity or first mover licensing fees, we can use to expand education, childcare, healthcare, bring down utility costs. And this is not just me Googling who is the foreign leader of XYZ country. I oversaw the CIA for 8 years. I went to 40 capitals. I met with presidents, prime ministers, kings, foreign ministers, and I'll leverage those relationships on behalf of California and make the case that if you invest in California and you bet on the most diverse, educated workforce in the world, the return for you will be great, and the return for Californians will be even greater.
So this sounds a little bit like California Inc.
California embassies all over the world. Yes,
Yeah.
we are a nation state, and we can't count on the federal government, where we are a donor state, and we can't even get money for wildfires for FEMA. We're seeing right now that the money that's being clawed back from the big brutal bill will close rural hospitals and reduce the number of people eligible for Medi-Cal. So we have to use the balance sheet of the fourth largest economy in the world and the educated workforce that we have to attract capital investments into California.
Okay. That sounds like a grand vision, but I like it.
And I bet a lot of folks will be up for being ambassadors for California to go and make the case and see that that capital that comes here and is deployed into California companies will make sure that we are always not just the fourth largest economy in the world, but a place where when you say that, it's not a data point, it means something as far as how you're doing, the bills you have to pay, and the future that you see for yourself and your kids.
So is it fair to say then you're talking about making California the center of innovation, no matter where you are in the United States or the world, and that investment dollars into California will continue to fund greatness in California?
It's making California resilient and recognizing that this president has taken so much from us, but he's not taken our grit, he's not taken our hard work, he's not taken our diversity. And so with that resilience, I think that is mitigating against what he or a future president could do. And as I said, we are a nation state. If we were a country, the governor of California would be equivalent to the leader of the 5 biggest countries in the world. And so we must start acting like it. And I see real opportunities to make sure that as this brain drain is happening right now, and by the way, scientists at UCSF, scientists at UCLA, UCSD are being poached by China, by Canada, by Europe. And so we are going to suffer unless we put more capital and investments into research and development in California.
Great. Thank you. Okay, last question. What is the endorsement that you are most proud of?
Well,
Is it your 3-year-old?
no, my kids are rooting against me because they just don't want any change or disruption in their life. But I'll tell you, I come from a public safety family. My dad was actually a firefighter at Alameda Naval Air Station, and then he became a police officer. And we have the endorsement of the California Firefighters and the California Police Chiefs Association. And to me, to make sure that we value public safety, and we also distinguish what true public safety looks like from what the president is subjecting us to
Amen.
with his ICE agents in our community, I think is really important.
Okay. All right. Thank you for joining us today, Eric. I appreciate it, and good luck.
My pleasure, and I'll see you all this weekend. Thank you.
All right. Nice to see you. All right. Okay, everybody take a breath. Rest your fingers from cramping because you've been writing too hard, too fast. There's some great ideas from these candidates. Our next up is former State Assembly member Ian Calderon. And here we go. Come on up. Welcome. All right,
Hello,
Ian.
everyone.
Former State Assembly member. You have the honor and distinction of being the first millennial elected to the State Assembly. Now you're 40, running for governor, father of small kids. Tell me about that. How's life going for you?
It's exhausting. So we drove up north on Tuesday, my wife and our 4 kids. Our kids are 8, 7, 5, and 4. So we got to drive up on Tuesday, and we've been bouncing around all along Northern California. We've been in Sacramento. We've been out in the Bay Area. We've been out to the coast, out in Santa Cruz, and it's been amazing. But yeah, I mean, we're having a great time, and I feel for my wife right now because she's stuck in a hotel room with all four of the kids. I think I've only gotten 3 send help texts from her. But yeah, I mean, this is something that I feel very passionate about. This is something that is extremely important to me because everything that is the most important thing in the world to me is tied to the future of this state and tied to the next governor. You know, my kids are everything to me. My family is everything to me. As you mentioned, I was the first millennial ever elected to the state legislature. I got elected just after turning 27 years old. And then
You can applaud for
Yeah.
that. I mean,
and then in 2016, I became the youngest majority leader in the history of the state. And I loved what I did. I loved my job. I loved being able to work on all the issues that I was able to work on. I loved being able to craft policies that would become national models in terms of what happens to your online information after you pass away or you lose a loved one, and keeping jobs in the state by re-upping and modernizing our film tax credit legislation. And as much as I loved what I did, because I was young when I got elected, I had a lot of major life milestones happen. So I got engaged, and then I got married, and we had 3 of our 4 kids while I was in the legislature. And as much as I was at the height of my power and the height of my influence, and I had a lot of people telling me, Ian, you could run statewide, you can be a member of Congress,
all
you could
the
go.
way.
I made a decision that nobody makes in my position, and I decided to leave. I had 4 years left that I could serve. But I knew that I was going to miss moments with my family and with my kids that I would never get back. And so I gave up my power. I gave up my influence to go and be a dad. And I've been a small business owner for the last almost 6 years. And I've been enjoying being able to take my kids to school in the morning and pick them up from school and being with my wife and living our life. But because of the importance of where we are in this moment and the shift you're seeing in generational leadership across this country with Zohran Mamdani getting elected mayor in New York and the retirements that are happening in Congress and a lot of these members of Congress saying it's up to the next generation. We have to have something new, something different ideas, bold ideas to try to solve these challenges. We tried, we couldn't do it, now it's on them. And I feel like if there was ever a moment for me to step up and do that, it is now because I have done this before. And I think in this moment, I'm the right candidate to do it again.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit because there is, I think, a divide in politics about when is too old to be. Sorry, I think I'm trending on the older side of things. But when is too old to hold public office? I think that you see a lot of millennials and Gen Zers saying, hey, it's time to allow a new, fresh set of leadership into the Democratic Party, except that the people at the top will not leave. So what's your view on that?
I mean, I view this as when I ran, I was 25 years old when I started my campaign for the state assembly. I'd never run for anything in my entire life. Now, I had the fortune of growing up around my father, who was a state legislator, he was the first Latino lawyer ever elected to the state Senate, only person in the history of the state to be majority leader of both the state Senate and the state assembly. So I learned the value of public service at a very early age. And when I had decided that I was going to do this, it really was centered around, look, I don't need to be the one calling all the shots. I don't need to be the one making all the decisions and getting all the attention. But I believe that I have a perspective that is important because Sacramento was constantly making decisions that were going to make things challenging down the line. They were going to throw costs and they were going to throw challenges onto the next generation. And I thought it was important that my generation be there to at least express how that maybe wouldn't be a good thing to do, and maybe we should work a little bit harder to mitigate some of these challenges. And so I think what you're just seeing right now is we've been so stuck in our politics of a lot of promises being made and no promises being kept. And especially for Democrats, you know, you could go out on the street and say, hey, this is what we believe as Democrats and this is who we are. But I think a lot of responses you'll get from people is, yeah, but do you have the courage to actually do any of it? And and when I take a look at why there's this generational shift in leadership happening, why you're seeing the baton of leadership being passed to the next generation, it is because people are so hungry for them to finally be the main character in our story. Mm-hmm. And what has happened is we have politics where the politician has convinced themselves that they're the main character in our story. And that's the problem, that's the challenge. It's, you know, we've done this, you know, budget allocation, or we've passed this bill, here's the press release, here's the social media post, yay, and then no follow through. And I think that people are just sick and tired of that because it's, what are you going to do to materially make my life easier to live? What are you going to do to make it so that I believe that not only do I have a future in this state, but my family has a future in this state? The whole impetus as to why I even considered running for governor was because I asked myself and my wife, do we believe that our kids have a future in this state and that one day they're not going to come to us and say, Mom, Dad, as much as I love you guys, as much as I want to stay in this state, if I want to move out of your house, which we want that one day too, if I want to own my own home or I want to start a family, I'm going to have to leave California in order to do it. And that terrifies me, and that's a failure of leadership that we cannot continue to accept.
So let's dig into that a little bit. What do you think are the top issues that Democrats talk about broadly, but have not yet delivered in California that are important to millennial families, to Gen Z, to people who might want to move here and people who cannot afford to stay here?
Well, I'll tell you what my top 3 priorities are, and this is what I think that California needs to focus on. It needs to be on housing, it needs to be on affordability, it needs to be on accountability. On housing, 10 years ago, I'm not joking, 10 years ago, as the young guy everybody was looking down their nose at, I authored legislation that says, you know what? I don't think it's fair that Blackstone just went and got $450 million worth of loans, and they're now competing against first-time home buyers and Californians and pricing us out of our homes and pricing us out of our communities. We should stop that. And the Democratic legislature, my Democratic colleagues said, no, Ian, that's not important right now. That's not important right now. So I said, okay, well, let's just track it. Maybe, why don't we, you know, you don't think it's a problem. I think it's a pretty significant problem because not only are they pricing you out of actually home ownership, what they are doing is they're taking your rents, they're bundling it together, and they're selling it as a security on the stock market. So you're their investment. So they want you to stay a renter, so let's just track it. No, that's not important either, Ian. Okay. And so what I want to do is I want to make sure that we stop foreign and corporate investors from buying our homes and pricing us out of our communities. We have told entire generations of Californians that home ownership isn't for them. They have told my generation home ownership isn't for me. The average age of a first-time home buyer is 40 years old. 55% of Californians are actually homeowners. The median priced home is $800,000, twice the national average. And in order to afford that median priced home, you have to be making over $235,000. So we don't have a pathway to home ownership. The only way our generation and future generations are able to actually buy a house is if their parents help them with the down payment to actually get into a home. because that down payment is a huge barrier. So we have to provide a refundable tax credit so that you can get access to, I'd say, what I'm going to do is $1,200 every single year, so you can use that to save for a down payment. We have to provide incentives so that we can actually get first-time home buyers into a home. Right now, I'll never forget, I went to the California Association of Realtors and I said, why should I care about Proposition 13 when I think it's keeping me out of buying a home? And we talked about it and I learned how it was something that we used to be able to keep teachers and public servants and firefighters in their home. And okay, I understand that. And that is something that we should protect. But now, as I sit as a candidate for governor, and I see so many generations that don't have access to a real pathway to home ownership, well, if I'm looking to buy a home and that's a Proposition 13 protected home, why not extend those benefits to me? Why not allow me to benefit from that so that I can actually lower the barrier to getting into a home and having a payment that I can afford? And homeowners, right now, homeowners in the state have access to a $7,000 property tax exemption credit. It has been $7,000 since 1978. If it had kept up with inflation, it would be $70,000. So we're gonna keep it up, and we're gonna raise it to $70,000. And how are we gonna pay for that? Remember I talked about my friends that are buying up our homes and pricing us out of home ownership? We're gonna charge them large fees to buy any of our homes, and all of the homes that they exist, they're gonna be charged an annual fee, and it's gonna fund us being able to buy homes and us being able to keep our families and our seniors in their homes.
All right. And so a lot of what you've said right now is about existing housing stock. What do we need to do? If you were governor, what would you do to encourage the creation of more housing stock so that California is not a net out-migration state?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of ways I want to talk about this, but I think that California is very coastally concentrated. Very coastally concentrated. I've been traveling all over this state to a lot of different communities. I've been spending a lot of time in the Central Valley. And I was talking to the mayor of Manteca, and the mayor of Manteca, interesting, he was saying, Ian, we can build homes here and we can sell them for $400,000, but we don't have any jobs for anybody to actually afford to buy these homes. What we need is investment so that we drive industry out to our communities so that people can not only have a job here, but they can actually buy a home. And I think that because we've focused so much of our investment in coastal California, we've really cut ourselves off and sequestered important parts of the state that I think are going to be a really big part of the renewal of our future and how we solve a lot of these challenges. We've only built on 6% of the overall land mass in California has been developed. And so the state needs to, A, stop doing one-size-fits-all policies so that every region has to play by the same rules, because the same rules do not exist up and down the state. What works in San Francisco or in LA or in San Diego is not going to work in these small communities in the Central Valley. We have to have regionalized, specific policies and pots of money to help drive investment in these communities so we can drive jobs there, and then we can build communities and people can actually afford to buy a home and continue to have a future and live in this state. And we have to remove the barriers. I will go on record and say that I think the next governor of California has to have the courage to declare a state of emergency on housing and put in place emergency regulations to jumpstart development and construction of housing in this state. But it cannot stop there. You have to codify those policies in law long term so that we don't end up back in this situation that we're in today.
Great. Now, I want to ask a question about what it means for there to be, we have a jungle primary system in California. Jungle primary, it's just top two, irrespective of what your party affiliation is. And the idea that there is a possibility, because the Democratic field is so split, there are so many candidates, that we may wind up in a situation where the top two are two Republicans. And no, it's a possibility. It is a possibility. I think they're tracking right now, it's about a 12% possibility, but that's not a zero possibility. So I want to ask you, many of people in the state of California are not familiar with Ian Calderon. Some of them may be introduced to you for the first time today. What do you say to people who are concerned about a vote for you is potentially a vote for two Republicans getting past the primary?
You know, I just take a look at the undecided voters. You got 30+% of the voters in the state that are undecided. And when you actually look at the numbers, I just don't believe that we're going to end up with two Republicans in the general election. But you know, what I will say is, you know, am I the candidate that you should be looking at as a result of that, or should you be talking to some of these other candidates that are starting to hit a ceiling and aren't showing that they can galvanize that support? And, you know, I can work through my challenges of being able to create more visibility. I will tell you, I've stayed very consistent in that 1% to 3% range. But my challenge is access to resources and visibility, which is something that could literally change within a day with the right backing and support, which is what we're continuing to work on. But if the candidates are seeing, or if the electorate are seeing the candidates now, and they're choosing, that's not the future that I want, or these aren't the candidates that are moving me to actually want to make a decision, I'm continuing to stay undecided, I think the onus is more on them, because as this race goes on and there's a ceiling that these candidates can't break through, what's going to happen? You're going to start looking for somebody else who represents me, who's going to actually focus on the things that are most important to me and represent my values. And I believe that, you know, and I believe this from the very beginning, that it isn't going to be money that decided this race. If that's the case, then, you know, then why should any of us be in here? Because nobody's going to have more money than Tom Steyer. And I like Tom. It's not a dig at Tom, but I'm just saying that, you know, if that's the case, then why are we all trying? And money isn't being the deciding factor. There's been a lot of money that's been spent in this race, and the people that have spent that money have gone absolutely nowhere up in the polls. And you're seeing a consistent decline in these top tier candidates that are going down in the polls. They're not going up in the polls. And so I think what's going to matter, just like what happened in New York, is going to happen in California. It's not an impossibility. It's actually, I think, more likely than people are willing to accept, even in a state like California, where you have an electorate that is hungry for something new and something different and a generational shift in leadership, that somebody who isn't considered viable now will very much so become viable as it gets closer. And when people really start paying attention to this election, they really start evaluating candidates, it's going to come down to the candidate, it's going to come down to the message, and who they truly believe is going to deliver on what they're saying, who has the capacity to do it. And so for me, it's just waiting for my moment.
Well, thank you for these 15 minutes of moment with you, Ian. Thanks so much for coming by.
Thank you for your time.
All righty. All right. Our next candidate is a former California Controller, Budget Director for Gray Davis, former Vice Chair of the Democratic Party. Betty Yee, come on up. Hi, Betty. Nice to see you. Come on, sit down for a minute. Yes. How are you?
I am doing well. It's always good to be home. So that is always the highlight. Thank you.
Yeah, so we got 15 minutes here to run through a lot. You have a deep, deep understanding of state processes, of the budget, the financial situation that California is. We are facing an affordability crisis. So I first want to dovetail back to something that you did as controller, which was as the fiscal watchdog for the state, you uncovered $7.3 billion in mismanaged spending by the state. How do you think the state is doing now?
I think because the state is a big operation, look, we're always going to have some misspending and some waste. And when I look at, and that was over my 8-year tenure as controller. And there were a couple of years where we couldn't even do full audits because of the pandemic. And so I think there's more there. But the bottom line with that is that, look, we're entrusted with the people's money. And so our job is to be sure that it's those dollars are being directed as determined by the legislature, that we have authority to spend. About half of that $7.3 billion was just looking at claims from departments to pay bills for the state of California, and where they did not have the right legislative authority to spend that money. So we're going to continue to be that watchdog, because this is what really elevates, I hope, the public's faith and confidence in their government, that we understand that these dollars really do need to be directed where they were intended to be.
Yeah, so you have a really good historic view on what California's economic future looks like, what it has been in the past. And one of the things that is is not keeping pace with the cost of living is wages.
Yes.
And so what do you think is the solution for, people who are earning hourly wages, who feel like they might be stuck in terms of how much they're able to earn for their families, and making sure that wages are consistent with the cost of living and allowing people to stay in California?
Sure. Yeah. Well, let me maybe frame it a little bit differently, Nancy. And that is, here in California, we are facing a growing wealth gap. And it's really affecting our Black and brown families the most, but it's also eating into the middle class. And when I think about how you deal with a wealth gap, I think about two things. One, obviously, you want to see whether people can have the ability to earn more. But I also think about what are the supports that they need to allow them to be able to pursue those economic opportunities, right? So it's higher wages on the one side, but then it's also the supportive things that they need, like affordability in healthcare. Maybe looking at family care being affordable so that they can actually be full participants in the workforce. And so I think for me, it's about how do we create stable jobs. And by the way, I think one of the antidotes to what we are facing as a matter of a budget deficit is how do we make investments in our communities and in our people and really look at where are those high demand jobs going to be in the future, because we're California, we're a global economy. People want to do business with us from all parts of the world, and I believe that we can create those jobs that will actually pay people higher wages.
Yeah, so how do we create an environment in California that attracts, retains those high-paying jobs in our state? And second part of the question is, how do we continue to train a workforce
Yes.
that is capable of taking on those jobs?
Yeah, and they're all related, and it's an excellent question. The biggest driver of being able to attract a workforce right now is housing affordability. It used to be taxes. But I think companies and even individual Californians understand that taxes are what supports the services that we all enjoy every day. For companies that are here, they understand that taxes are for the privilege of doing business here in California. But when they look at the cost of housing and where their workforce is going to live, that is the key. That is the driver. And I'll just say, like about 15 or 20 years ago, Standard & Poor's, we were in a rating agency meeting because we were selling bonds, the state of California. And S&P was the first to really identify that if California doesn't get a grip on the housing affordability for the long term, it's going to be a drag on any kind of economic health for the long term. And we're at that point now. And so we have to do something about housing affordability, which then means that, and when we talk about declining enrollment in our schools, a lot of that has to do with housing affordability. So it kind of all converges back on that one issue.
Okay, so how do we make housing more affordable in California?
Well, we had a forum this morning with our YIMBY community, and let me just say, the table's been set in terms of all kinds of options, in terms of how we can build housing. We have exempted a number of different kinds of regulations to be sure that we don't have the hurdles, those regulatory hurdles in front of us, like CEQA in some cases. And then we also need to do more in terms of expediting the approval processes. So all of that is going to be part of how we implement all the bills that have been passed that Governor Newsom has signed. But now the financing has to be aligned in terms of how we're going to build this. Local governments have a really tough job because they have a lot of responsibility, but actually don't have a lot of authority with respect to how to raise revenue. How do you make the finances and the fiscal situation work out in terms of how you build housing? I actually want to bring back redevelopment because it is a way to look at in every jurisdiction how you can really, with a sense of urgency, bring more housing stock online more quickly and not have to think about options like rehab, reuse, adaptive reuse, so that we can bring those units online much more quickly and also much more affordably.
Okay. And then the part about education. We have declining enrollment across the entire state in public education. Teacher strikes. In San Francisco, we just got done with the teacher strike. They were striking in West Contra Costa. LA County is looking at some teacher strikes too. So what is the solution for school districts that are strapped for cash? They're constrained. They may be under fiscal oversight by the state, and teachers who definitely deserve to be paid more for taking care of my kids.
Totally agree.
So,
Totally agree. Look,
yeah.
I'm a product of the schools here in the city, and it breaks my heart. Really breaks my heart. But this is not unique to San Francisco, as you've just mentioned, Nancy. So, you think about how there are cost drivers in each of our lives, right? In our budgets, when we're thinking about our own household budgets. Every time there are cost increases in anything, whether it's our utilities, our healthcare, Imagine what that looks like for a school district, right? For how to maintain their facilities, how to look at how they're going to pay their workers and also their health care. What I think needs to happen are a couple things. One, as I mentioned earlier, we have got to make this more attractive in terms of people wanting to live in San Francisco because of the cost of housing. It just can't take over 50% or more of their income. Secondly, looking at how we can help, the state can help bring down some of those cost drivers for school districts, and I'll just mention one, healthcare. I actually believe there's a model of healthcare that we can assist school districts with, where the state is in a position of looking at how to create an insurance pool for our school districts that hopefully can result in some savings in the school district budgets, and that's something that I know other states have looked at, and I think a big purchaser like the state of California on behalf of school districts, that might be something worth exploring.
Yeah, I know that for our school teachers, dependent healthcare was one of the major issues driving their budget negotiations, where a single person might be at no cost. If you had any dependents, it was $1,200 a month more. And so they were really fighting hard for making sure that their families were taken care of.
Absolutely.
And we'll see how the school district is able to absorb that or not. But along those lines, in terms of funding our schools, there are monies that are designated by Prop 98
Yes.
to go to school districts. But Governor Newsom held back some of those funds to plug some other holes in the budget and did not release them to school districts. And so to the extent that there are funding streams that are supposed to be for education, is that something that you as the governor would say, okay, well, I'm going to take this pot of money and like smooth it over here a little bit, and then okay, we'll give it back later. Well, how would you approach that?
For me, when voters enacted Prop 98, it was meant to be a floor, not a ceiling. And when we short school districts of that funding, you begin to think, particularly when it's cumulative over many years, you begin to see how they're just not able to continue to keep pace, just even with the costs, basic costs of services that they have to provide, but also the costs of just operating facilities, school facilities, all of that. I would frankly come clean, because this is not sustainable. We have to talk about how we're going to fund education where we want to get good outcomes, we want to close that achievement gap, and we know that it's not a one-size-fits-all for all school districts in California. But anytime we hold back that money, there are going to be consequences. And so when we do that, and frankly, it's a liability that we carry on the books for the state of California that has to be repaid back. And so I think more transparency around that, and what the consequences are of doing that. And when you have programs that are really trying to do their best to close the achievement gap, and you don't have sustained, permanent, ongoing funding, you're going to see these starts and stops in terms of progress. And so that's not really helping our learners in the long run.
Well, and we need to have a well-educated workforce in order to continue to attract industries into California, right?
Exactly.
So I want to switch gears a little bit here and talk a little bit about your view in terms of, you coming from an immigrant household. Your parents were immigrants to the United States. You were born in San Francisco, and what that, how that informs your attitude about immigration policy, about the Trump administration and what ICE is doing, and the threat of that coming into California.
Yeah, it is a threat for sure. Look, first of all, just federal immigration reform is long overdue. And I don't think there's a mystery about what needs to be done. I'll just share the story about my own family. My father came here at the age of 14 and was in a prearranged marriage with my mother. And his family basically told him, you don't have a life here. You need to go to the United States, actually known as Gold Mountain, Kim's son, and provide a better life for your future bride and family. And his path to citizenship, he came over. My godfather was already here at the time, sponsored my dad over. My dad apprenticed in the laundry business and was part of the laundry and dry cleaning workers union in Chinatown, and then enlisted in the United States Army and served in active duty during World War II. And that was his path to becoming a naturalized citizen. It was a common path, actually, during that time for many who immigrated here at that time. So these pathways, and especially for immigrants who have already been here, I mean, they've been contributing to the economy, there should be a way where they can get legal status and be recognized. And we're spending so much more money, and I do want to remind people, we are spending, $45 billion in enhancing detention facilities, our money, taxpayer money, $170 billion for enhanced ICE enforcement. These are the priorities of this administration when we actually could be looking at how do we support our immigrants so that they can continue to contribute to our economy. And so these are the choices that are being made. California, I will say, we will always be a place where we really uplift our immigrant populations. And and I think we're going to have to be the model of what actually legal status looks like, because we're not going to turn our back on the people who are here contributing to our economy.
Thank you, Betty. So what do you think the role is then for the governor with respect to fighting against the Trump administration? I mean, we see how Governor Newsom is doing it. Some of it is in all caps.
Yes.
But what would your brand of leadership be in that role?
Sure. Well, first, as the chief executive of the state, if we're under attack, if our rights and protections are being eroded and threatened, if our federal funding is being pulled out, we're going to fight. We're going to fight. This is a partnership, and obviously we've been hearing a lot more, and people are conscious of the fact that California's been a donor state, and so we actually get less back than what we pay the federal government relative to taxes. So it's to be a partnership, and so when they pull out like that, we're going to fight because it's hurting our people. We're going to use the judicial system to do that. But I also think that part of what we've not done is focus inwardly here, right here in California. How do we strengthen all of our communities here within California so that we're actually fighting with economic resistance? That communities are strong because we have helped them become, small business owners, entrepreneurs, that we're attracting high demand jobs here in California. And that this vulnerability, this economic vulnerability, doesn't become a liability in terms of being a target for the federal government, but becomes a strength for us to know that we're going to have resilience and be able to withstand that. And so that's where I want to focus on. It's yes, we're going to fight back. And yes, and by the way, as a woman of color, to be the next governor, I'm probably his worst kind of nightmare. And as a woman, I know how to nag and poke and kind of do all those things that kind of get under, the skin. So we're gonna fight. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we need to uplift all of our communities to be as strong, as resilient as possible from an economic perspective. Yeah.
Okay. All right, Betty, last question. There are a lot of strong candidates in this field.
Yes.
Very divided Democratic field. A couple of Republicans fighting out for their, 30% of the electorate. What is the best case for Betty Yee to be the next governor of California?
Sure. Look, I am somebody who understands state government. I understand budgets. We've been talking about affordability. You cannot solve the affordability crisis without a governor who needs to fix the state budget. Period. Full stop. The other thing I will say is I don't need on-the-job training. I'm ready to start on day one, ready to roll up my sleeves and do the work. And I'm just going to say this, and this is not being disrespectful to the candidate field by any means, but people are fed up. People are just worn out. They're tired. They're tired. They want to see government really deliver for them in a meaningful way. And so as I've traveled up and down the state with this grassroots campaign, it is really tapping into those sentiments of the voters. And so for me, it's all about the past track record, my fiscal and financial experience that I know many voters really care about. I'm a problem solver and really am ready to deliver, results and outcomes and holding ourselves accountable. We should not think about accountability as a dirty word, which has become a little bit in Sacramento because it's known more widely now as like, who are you going to throw under the bus instead of how do we do better together with the resources that we have. So for me, it's about the track record. It's about being ready to do the job. It's about tapping into what I believe the needs are throughout California. So I've traveled pretty extensively the state, and also knowing that a one-size-fits-all doesn't really make sense for every part of the state. But what does make sense in California is that we have a wonderfully diverse state. We live in a beautiful state. And the people always, always, always. We're the fourth largest economy. We should be able to do business with any part of the world, and we should act like it in terms of elevating our ambition to be a fourth global economy by incentivizing and really attracting private capital to a lot more of what we do. So whether it's housing, transportation, but I'm ready to do that work. I've been on the global stage with respect to some of my work. And Nancy, I just got to say, I'm back home here in San Francisco, and my mother's 102 years old. I was born 1.5 miles from here at Chinese Hospital, and she just looks at me after every election recently, and I said, "Ma, how are you feeling about the outcome of this election?" And she looks at me and she says, "We know what we got to do."
Oh, I love it.
And in that tone, like, go do it. So I'm ready to go do it.
Okay, thank you for joining us, Betty. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Nancy.
All right. Next up, any guesses? Any guesses? Okay, you don't have to guess. It's Tony Thurmond, who's our current state superintendent of public instruction, former state assembly member, former school board member in West Contra Costa, city council member in Richmond. Tony Thurmond.
Well, hello, everybody.
Here we go. Hi, welcome. Nice to see you. You have a mic right there. Your mom was an immigrant from Panama
Yes.
and passed when you were 6 years old.
Yes.
Tell us about your upbringing, your growing up, and how that influences the way that you view government and politics.
Yeah. My grandparents were, on my mom's side, immigrants who came to this country from, my grandmother was born in San Andres, Colombia. She met my Jamaican-born grandfather in Panama, where they raised their 6 kids, including my mom. And they cleaned bathrooms for a living, because they wanted a better life. And they saw education as that. And so my mom was a teacher, and she taught in San Jose, and she raised 4 kids until she couldn't. And when I was 6, she got sick, lost her battle to cancer. And my dad, who was a soldier, out at Fort Ord in Monterey, was deployed to Vietnam and was in Vietnam when my mom passed away. So after she passed away, I was sent to live with a cousin in Philadelphia with my 5-year-old brother in tow. Mm-hmm. I'd never met this cousin before. She took us in and raised us as her sons. Well, if I'm being honest, she kept us on lockdown.
Well, that's what a good mother does.
She said, you have 2 choices. You can go to school or you can go to school. Guess what I chose? I went to school. She believed in education, though she didn't have a formal education. I was raised in a household where we didn't often have food. I grew up on free lunch programs, food stamps, and government cheese. We ate so much government cheese, I thought that USDA was a brand name. These programs helped my family overcome poverty and getting an education. And so these experiences shape how I think, not just about the governor's race, but service to Californians. And I've been honored to have 18 years in those offices that you have shared, and the mission's always been the same, serve the people. This governor's race comes at the most critical time because we have this economic crisis, and we have a madman in the White House who's trying to drive our country into the ground. But I believe that we are more than some of our circumstances, and we will rise up and we will overcome what's coming out of Washington, D.C., and we will get through to a better side. And that's why I want to be governor of this state and to help us lead through where we are right now.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Now, we've been talking a lot this afternoon with candidates about the affordability crisis facing our state. California is the most expensive state in the country to live in. The San Francisco Bay Area is the most expensive metro area, cost of living wise. And so one of those component pieces for just unaffordability is housing. And you have a very bold vision of building 2 million. We heard another candidate say 1 million.
He said 1 million after I said 2 million. He was supposed to go above my number, but that's okay. That's okay.
So 2 million housing units in the next 4 years by
right.
2030.
That's right.
And let's dive in a little bit. How does that happen?
Yeah. The good news is we have all the elements to make that happen. There are 75,000 acres of land that's ready for development right now. It so happens that those acres of land sit on school district surplus property in each of the 58 counties in our state. And so I'm working on legislation that would allow school districts to work with developers to build housing there. The good news is it will not require any additional permitting from the city. And I think with just a little bit of support, if those districts built just 12 units on each of those parcels, we get to 2.3 million units of housing by the year 2030. It's something that we can do now. And, you know, this state has not kept pace with the demand for housing, and we've seen the price go up as a result. This is an immediate solution. I have legislation right now that would provide some startup funds to school districts to help them in technical assistance, right? Because they don't normally do housing. And it would allow us to build the 2.3 million units of housing. And when you factor in that, and I'm going to make sure that we have down payment assistance programs for first-time home buyers, we can begin to build our way out of the housing crisis in the state of California.
Okay. Now, in terms of these housing parcels and helping with school districts, do you think that 4 years is enough runway to get those housing units completed if school districts are kind of not in the business of building housing? And what is the funding mechanism, or what is going to be the attraction for developers to actually invest in this kind of vision of building housing?
Well, developers are already interested. They won't stop calling me. And the financing is available in different ways. You know, there are real estate transactions that every time a home is purchased, there are certain dollars that go to cities to support building affordable housing. I've introduced legislation that says that school districts should also be eligible for that same pot of funding. So it's not asking to make more funding allocations, it's just saying make a different municipality eligible. And so, but districts need the technical assistance also on how to do this. They need to know how to value the land. They need to know how many parcels can be built. And so this isn't something, and this isn't saying that if you're a school district employee, you're going to be renting from your employer. This is not that. But they'll be partnering with developers that can build the affordable housing. And so this strategy has already been studied by several groups, including out of UC Berkeley. They came up with the 4-year timeline. I accepted it as my homework assignment to say I will get it done and to give myself a measurable timeline to get that done.
Well, I'll say that we have teacher housing in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Has been wildly successful. In
Yes.
fact, we had more lottery applicants for those housing units than we had housing available for teachers. But having the teachers in the communities that they serve, I think, is a bonus for everybody all the way
That's right.
around.
That's right. And we can expand it to first responders, nurses, city, county staff. Everyone is affected by the housing inaffordability crisis, as I call it. And this is something that we can do right now to change that.
Okay. So it's not just the affordability crisis, but it's also a question of budgets in the state, because what we've seen is the federal government is withholding a lot of money that should be coming to California, even though we send more money to Washington, D.C. than they ever give back to us in benefits. There is a CEO tax. I'm sorry. I was corrected once on this. Billionaire's tax that is slowly inching its way towards the November ballot, and you are in full-throated support of that. Is that right?
Sorry for any billionaires in the room. I've endorsed the measure. Okay.
Okay, so let's talk about that as a funding source, right? It's a one-time source of revenue. It would be taxing the 200 billionaires that live in the state of California, or who may have moved out of the state since then. But tell me why this is, why you're in support of this measure.
Think about California over the last few years. I mean, and I've been studying this for 18 years. We don't have steady and predictable revenue for the things that we need in our state. As you all know, we mostly get our revenue based on income tax, and that fluctuates. The way I often think of this is during the pandemic, we had flush budgets. We had some of the greatest surpluses ever. That means someone got rich during the pandemic and off of the pandemic. Coming out of the pandemic, we have these huge deficits. And so it seems to me that we need to have stable revenue that we can count on. We can't make it on income tax alone. and we cannot tax working families and middle-class families any more than you're already taxed. And so my idea is you tax billionaires, and then you give a tax credit to working families and middle-class families to have more money in your pocket every single month to pay for the rising costs of gas, groceries, and housing, while we build more housing to help bring down the cost when there's more supply to meet the demand. And so call me Robin Hood, tax the billionaires, give it to the people of California, and say that we want to support the ability to have more health care. Many people are going to be kicked off of our Medi-Cal and Medicaid rolls. Many people are already seeing their premiums go up from the Affordable Care Act, from the changes that were made in Washington, D.C. by the so-called Big Ugly Bill, or whatever they're calling it. And so we know that hospitals will close, emergency rooms will close. This measure will give us the ability to continue to provide the healthcare safety network that we need to protect Californians.
So in terms of us really needing a consistent stream of funding for our budgets, does this CEO tax not go far enough? Because it's kind of a one-time thing. So does it not go far enough in terms of providing that continuous stream of funding for our state?
I think it's a great start, but I think we have to look at other loopholes that can be closed in our tax structure, again, that protect working families and middle-class families, but ask those who've earned more to pay more and to do their fair share. It's as simple as that. Californians are really shouldering the burden for the services that are needed. Now, the first thing we have to do is look for any waste and fraud and root that out. There are programs in our state where there is documented waste, like in the unemployment compensations division. There is fraud, and to the tune of billions.
Oh, there was a ton of fraud in ETD,
Right?
right around the time of the pandemic, yeah.
Absolutely. And people were very open about it, that they were collecting a check, and that creates a disservice to those who experience, an injury or hardship. And so, yes, we have to have accountability, but California, 40% of those who are unhoused in our state are older Californians. We have to have revenue to take care of those who are unhoused in our state. We have to have revenue to close the gap on these healthcare items that we need. We need more revenue still for California schools and for higher education. Think of those who are in our CSUs and our UCs. These are the flagship institutions anywhere. So many of our students are homeless. They are food insecure. Our California students experience more debt just to get an education. They won't be able to buy a home or launch a business. That's why this year I introduced a bill that would actually make college free. And allow someone to go for free, and when they get a job, they start to pay that back, and it creates a pool of money for the next group of folks who come after them. They call it pay it forward, because I've heard all the stories from people who said, I went to the UC for free. Anybody in here? I hear this all the time. And so we have to lower the debt for our families who are trying to finance a college degree. And so I think we're going to need other forms of revenue to go along with this billionaire's tax so that government can continue to deliver on its promise to those who need additional supports.
So my next question is about public education, and I feel like I'm talking to a subject matter expert here. So, we saw a lot of strikes,
Yes.
and we will continue to see teacher strikes for our school districts. And I know that you came by to the negotiations between UESF and the San Francisco Unified School District. What is your vision for how California funds public education so that we have a workforce that is ready to step into those 21st century jobs to keep our economy moving?
Yeah. Any educators in the house? Big round of applause for all of our educators. Thank you. Thank you. Our system has a structural flaw in it. The way we fund schools is based on average daily attendance. When a student shows up, the school gets money. When a student is out, the school district loses money. And districts have experienced two things that are a huge challenge under a system like that. One, population decline. Population has been declining for decades. San Francisco has one of the lowest populations of families that have school-age children and young children. And so just by design, there is a flaw in how our schools get revenue. The other thing is just average daily attendance and declining enrollment. And so in order to bolster our schools so that they don't have to close and they don't have to have teachers go out on strike, we have to move from an average daily attendance system to an enrollment-based system so that the schools have predictable revenue that they can count on, that they can make decisions about staffing. Here in San Francisco Unified, they struggle to know how many middle school principals and assistant principals that they can have. And the families were really upset because they know they need those leaders on campus supporting the teachers, providing training, and supporting the students. And so if we were to move to a system of having an enrollment-based system, it would mean $6 billion more for schools all across our state. Our schools need that revenue, and as governor, I will sign the legislation to move us from an average daily attendance system to an enrollment-based system.
Great, thank you. We have time for one more question, and this brings us out of the inward-looking and more towards the outward-looking. What would your philosophy be as governor in dealing with challenges vis-a-vis the federal administration and what Trump has done with ICE, with taking money from California, and continuing to be a thorn in the side of everybody here?
You can say that, right?
I could have said something else, too.
I like how you said it. I thought, you didn't say it, but I thought the word that you were thinking. You know, last year I wrote a bill that's been signed into law that says ICE has no place in any school in the state of California. And passed legislation to keep ICE out of our hospitals and out of our emergency room. It is a cruel thing when someone threatens you to the point that you don't even want to go see a doctor. And so I'm working on a new bill with a local assembly member here, Assemblymember Matt Haney, that says any company that operates an ICE detention center, and sadly there are 7 in California, any company that operates an ICE detention center, we will put a 50% tax on that company. And as governor, I will work with Congress to abolish ICE once and for all. We should abolish ICE and work on creating a pathway to citizenship for those who want the chance to work and pay taxes. Many of the immigrants in California simply are doing that. They're paying taxes into programs that they can't even utilize, like Social Security. And if you look at who's in these ICE detention centers, these aren't people who have created harms against our community. These are farm workers. These are folks who are working in our homes and sometimes as childcare workers. And so, you know, we have to have conversations with the federal government to say that we're not going to tolerate that. And Trump impounded illegally $6 billion from California schools. And we sued his you-know-what and got that money back for California schools. We will fight in the courts. We will work in Congress. And we will pass legislation that will protect Californians against this reckless and cruel threat that we see in our communities. And I'm certain the Constitution did not envision that ICE agents would have the kind of powers and authority that they are exercising. It looks like mob rule. And we are a nation of laws, as they say. And our citizens and our community members have a right to be safe, and they have a right to expect that their government won't be a threat to them. And together, we will work together, and we will overcome what's coming out of D.C. We will outlive this administration, and we will find a way to get over and to prosper and build a better California.
Thank you, Tony Thurmond. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, that's it. Thanks. All right, everybody, stand up, have a stretch break. We're 2/3 of the way through. Okay, make sure your fingers you're not getting carpal tunnel, right, from taking all the notes. Okay.
So Lunar New Year bites and
Okay.
refreshments after the last speaker.
Okay, and everyone, just make sure that if your tummy is grumbling a little bit, that you hang on for the last 3 candidates, because we will have some Lunar New Year bites for you downstairs in a little reception. So hang on, we're almost there. Our next candidate in the hot seat is Javier Becerra, who previously represented California in the House of Representatives from 1993 to 2017. Later served as the Attorney General for the state of California, fought against the Trump administration, and then was also the Health and Human Services Secretary in the Biden administration. So welcome to the stage. Have a seat. You were born in Sacramento.
Yes, I was.
You want to return to Sacramento?
I'm there now.
Well, there's a very special place that you want to return to in Sacramento.
Yes, there is.
It's the governor's seat. Mexican immigrant parents, and you have done a lot in healthcare policy, consumer protection, defending the Affordable Care Act. Tell us about what you learned about leadership from being the head of the Department of Health and Human Services for the whole country.
Now, actually, can I just say something? I don't know if you've already done this, but I think Nancy deserves some applause because I think she's already gone through 5 or 6 candidates. Did they give you a bathroom break at least?
No. No bio breaks here.
So I applaud you for doing this and for those who are here attending. When Donald Trump handed the keys over to Joe Biden in January 21st, 2021, 10 jumbo jets of Americans crashed and burned, and everyone in those planes died. The reason you didn't see the headline that way is because they died of COVID, but more than 4,100 people died in one day in 2021 when the keys were handed over to the White House. That's what the Biden administration was handed by the Trump administration. Day in, day out, and I hate to try to take you back, but that's what was going on. Thousands of Americans were dying every day. You could not be in a room like this. You certainly would all be wearing masks, or should be. And we didn't know what we needed to do with our grocery when we got home after we bought them. We'd start wiping them down.
Oh, no, I washed mine in dish soap.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah. I had a tub of strawberries floating in some diluted dish soap because I was so petrified during COVID.
So that's where we came in. And my marching orders from the president were, go save lives. How we do it? Up to you, go save lives. And so what we did was we essentially launched a Marshall Plan for vaccinations. Never done before in this country, not during our lifetimes. And by the time we had finished our 4 years, we had put some 700 million COVID vaccine shots into the arms of each and every one of you and every one of your fellow Americans. The most accomplished moment for me on that is that not a one of you ever paid a penny for that life-saving vaccination. And so when you ask, what do you learn? Well, you learn that in a crisis, you've got to deliver, because at least with COVID, it was lives on the line. With drug price negotiations, we needed to deliver lower prices to prove that if, in fact, you gave the government, for the first time in history, an opportunity to negotiate with the largest drug companies what the price would be instead of just accepting what they told you to pay, you could save Americans money. And today, there are drugs that you are now paying list price 80% less than you were before we had a chance to negotiate them. And so you learn a lot of things, but the thing you truly learn is you just got to deliver. And you need a team that knows how to do so. And what you need to do is assemble the best people you can and then just go right at it. And that's what we did.
So how does that translate to the governor's office?
Well, right now, we are in a break glass moment. We are in crisis mode, whether it's because of these man-made crises coming out of Washington, D.C., or it's because of the cost of living crisis we face here at home. How do we handle that? I would say to you, in these times of turbulence, you need someone in the the Oval Office, not quite, not quite.
need someone different in the Oval Office, too.
In the governor's office, who won't be doing on-the-job training. You don't want someone who you elected because of the inflated promises. You want someone who actually knows how to land that plane during these turbulent times. And so look for those people who've actually had to run a public enterprise with a budget as large as the state of California. There's only one person who's running for governor who's actually had to balance a budget as large as the state of California.
$321 billion, right?
$321 billion. That's the state's budget. My budget was at HHS was not only bigger than that budget, but it was bigger than the budget of the Department of Defense and the state of California's budget combined, $1.8 trillion. And we had to balance that. And by the way, it's not easy. Every year, I would hear from the White House and the Office of Management and Budget, you need to send us over what you're going to do to make sure that you don't run a deficiency, right? You don't have to spend more than what you've got, because you cannot spend money that the taxpayers didn't give you. And so I would always have to tell my team, and I have a very large team, FDA, CDC, NIH, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, which runs Medicare, Medicaid, and Affordable Care Act, CHIP program for kids. We had to constantly tell them, show me how you're going to reduce your budget by, we usually had 2 cycles, 5 or 6%, whatever it was, or 2 or 3%. Show me. And I had to tell my team to be ready. And if they didn't come up with enough, I'd always tell them, show me extra where I can cut. Not that I want to do it, but in case I need to go there, that's where I'll go. And so every year we had to go through that exercise. But at the end of the day, 4 years in a row, $1.8 trillion budget, we balanced it.
Well, I mean, that's an incredible lot of experience with budgeting and making sure that you can manage something that big. Californians are facing an affordability crisis. That's housing, it's groceries, it's gas, utilities, childcare, elder care. What as governor would you do in order to combat those affordability issues?
One thing I don't believe we demand enough as a people with a government as powerful as the state of California, because we are the 4th largest economy in the world, is answers. One of the things that I've said is that within the first 100 days, I will freeze property insurance premiums for Californians, and I will freeze utility rates for Californians. I can do that by declaring a state of emergency in California. And what I will say is that it is unfathomable that we continue to see increases in utilities and in our property insurance, yet there are people who are losing their insurance after years and years of having paid it. My mother just mentioned to me that she lost coverage. She's had Allstate for decades on a property she has. They just notified her that they're dropping her, that they're no longer going to coverage. The coverage that they're offering now is more than twice as expensive with less protection. No explanation. My property insurance in a home that is nowhere near wildfire areas also more than doubled. The only explanation, maybe you got this one as well, that 1-page letter that said, under the FAIR Plan, we, the insurance industry, are entitled to recoup our losses from those insurance premium payers. And so I think it's time we said to them, wait a minute, explain to me why it went up so much. I get it, maybe it went up because we have to make sure we compensate for the wildfires that occurred in Palisades and Altadena. But show me that it had to go up that much. Or show me that utilities have to go up that much when you, utility company, are making double-digit profits. And so we deserve an answer. We'll pay what's fair. I think all of us are prepared to do that. But let's first figure out what's fair before we let them start hiking our rates again, or getting out of Dodge once we start to see they have to make payments on claims.
So this is a convenient segue. If you were not here with us last week, we did a forum on this stage with 6 of the candidates for insurance commissioner. And it is available on the CommonwealthClub.org website for you to go and watch if you want to pick an insurance commissioner to support. So a big part of affordability is housing. And there have been a couple of candidates on stage saying, I got a plan for 1 million units of housing in the next 4 years. I got a plan for 2 million units of housing in the next 4 years. How many more million units of housing do you have up your sleeve? Because we need them.
Well, we absolutely need probably somewhere in the range of 3 to 4 million over the course of the 8 years of the next governor. And so if I'm going to try to reach close to those milestones, you really are looking at 1.5 million to 2 million over the first 4 years. But here's the difficulty, getting this unstuck. You've got to get going. So here's what I would do. Again, within my first 100 days, I will tell my team, I need you to scour the state and find me all those projects that are near shovel ready to develop. And then once we've collected those, then we will do a quick triage and figure out what it takes to actually get them to be shovel ready. Let's move those projects that are on the verge, so they're no longer on the verge, but they are constructing. So this is where we start, because one thing I need to do is give you, the public, the voters, the confidence that we really will build. Because once you believe that there will be a home that you can buy, you're going to fret less about not being able to compete. Here's another thing I think we have to do. I don't think it's fair for you to be shopping for a home and then find out as you're getting ready to submit your bid that the person or the entity you're competing with is Wall Street. And I don't believe Wall Street should be gobbling up the homes that many Californians are hoping to buy. It is tough to compete. And so we have to make it so that there's a playing field that we can play on. Here's the other thing I'll tell you. There's many other things we have to do. Obviously, the streamlining of regulations, making it so zoning doesn't kill projects. Look at our building codes a little closer so we're not demanding things that make no sense. But here's one thing I really do believe we can do that will help. It won't solve it, but it will help. I don't know how many renters are in this audience right now, and if you're living in the San Francisco area, I suspect you're probably paying somewhere around $3,000 or more a month in your rent for a pretty small place.
But it's got charm.
It's got charm. But you know what it doesn't have for you? Equity. Because all you're doing is paying somebody else so they can own that home. You're essentially paying their monthly mortgage payment, but you don't get anything out of it. The only thing you're lacking is the down payment. And so I believe we should expand those down payment assistance programs so we can get more people to actually turn the key to actually become the homeowner, not the renter, at a monthly rate that would let them own that home. And if we do that, again, I'm hoping I can inspire more Californians to believe that finally my government is starting to work for me.
Well, that's great. I think there are a lot of young people in the audience who are sighing relief right now because the idea of home ownership for millennials, Gen Zers is pretty much out of reach at this point.
Almost non-existent. In fact, I had one young woman when I was here at San Francisco at an event. I talked about, the way I frame it is, I want today's construction worker and clerical worker to be able to do what my parents, a construction worker and clerical worker, did. Now, they never had a chance to go to college. My dad didn't get past the 6th grade. But they sent my 3 sisters and I to college or the military. They bought a tiny home. And then my dad built the home I grew up in. And when it came time to retire, they didn't have to go to Idaho or Arizona. They got to stay here. I want today's construction worker and clerical worker to be able to do the same thing. And I had this young woman in the audience say to me, I don't even think about buying a house anymore. And then she was going to go on with her question. I said, stop. I forgot her name now, but I said, stop. You and I are going to exchange contact information because I want you at my inauguration. Because after that, we're going to sit down and I'm going to show you the roadmap on how you're going to buy a house. Because I need you to buy a house. Because if you never buy a house, you're only going to be a paycheck to paycheck family. I need you to develop wealth. Most families in this country, the only way they develop wealth is by the purchase of a home. Because a home accrues equity in most cases. Most cars don't. Most appliances don't. Everything depreciates. A home appreciates. You want to establish wealth,
You got to go beyond your monthly income, and that means buying a home. So I said to her, I'm going to have a program that's going to meet your needs. She was about a junior at UC San Francisco. I said, we're going to have a plan because you've got to buy a house.
Yeah, that's really the plan. It's the whole idea of building generational wealth through equity in real property that I think a lot of people miss out on and don't have the educational background or a role model in order to lead them to that path.
But yet my parents, without any education, they did. Mm-hmm. And so what was it that was so special about California in those days that we've lost? And I don't believe it's that we can't do it anymore. We're the fourth largest economy. The resources are out there. We just got to make sure it's getting to those families as well.
So I don't think there's anyone, maybe one or two candidates that are as well suited as you to talk about fighting the Trump administration, which you did when you were Attorney General.
Actually, you need to name the others who are even anywhere close to being able to fight the Trump administration.
Well, I know that you filed 120 lawsuits against the Trump administration, and that deserves a round of applause. As Attorney General.
And won most of them. That's the more important thing. Fighting is good, but you need to know how to win.
So, and I think there are a couple of themes that have developed over the course of our conversations today. One is inward. How do we make California more affordable for the people here and make sure to continue to grow our economy with innovation? And the second part is how do we fight for the next 2 years against an administration that wants to crush us? So why don't you take that and run with it?
You've got to be smart. I could have filed 240 lawsuits against Donald Trump because I had any number of states and others coming to me and say, can you file this one as well? And you have to be smart because, as I said, you don't want it to just be known as a shadow boxer. You want to be known as someone who actually, when you punch, you knock them out. And so you got to win. And so we won over and over. The other thing I'll tell you is you need to know when to fight. And I told my team at the California Department of Justice, we're not waiting for a suit to be filed. When we get an inkling that something's brewing, I need my team to start working up the papers so we're ready to go. And so the way I said it to them is, before they punch, we're going to land our counterpunch and let them know. So that's how we ended up, your California Department of Justice, I as the Attorney General, that's how we ended up being the team that defended the Affordable Care Act in the Supreme Court on behalf of every American in the country, not just California. Because you see, when Congress kept trying to pass these repeal bills, and they couldn't. Finally, Republican state AGs said, well, we're going to sue to get rid of it again. And so they sued. Guess who was supposed to defend the Affordable Care Act? Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. It was a federal law. I went to Louisiana.
He is the former Secretary of Health and Human Services.
Yes. Yes. I went to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal in Louisiana. Yep. That's where the lawsuit was filed to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, and where Donald Trump was supposed to defend it. I went to the Fifth Circuit, my team, we said, we're not quite sure that we can count on this administration to defend California's interest before the courts on the Affordable Care Act. We would like to intervene. And sure enough, the Fifth Circuit, allowed us to intervene. And within months, the Trump administration bailed out of the case altogether. And they left it to us. And in those days, as you can see from the Supreme Court, no one expected us to win. 5-4, we beat them, and we kept the Affordable Care Act alive. We did the same thing. We did the same thing with the DACA program for Dreamers. Donald Trump decided he wanted to eliminate the Dreamer program. And I said, that's not right. These folks relied on the representations of the federal government to come out and expose themselves. And most of my Democratic AG colleagues would say, but Javier, that's an executive order. That's not a law. A president can issue an executive order, and any president can rescind an executive order. How are you going to defend that? I said, look, you can issue and you can rescind. You still got to do it according to the law. And so I rolled the dice. I told my team, let's prepare as best we can. Those of you who are attorneys know there's a really well-worn phrase in law, arbitrary and capricious. You are not allowed as government to act arbitrarily and capriciously with the American people. And that's what we said. The Trump administration was being arbitrary and capricious with the lives and livelihood of hundreds of thousands of people. 5-4. We won in the Supreme Court. And we kept it alive.
All right. And that is time. Javier, thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to be with you on stage.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah.
Major update.
Yeah.
We have to cut the clock.
All right. Our next guest on stage, Antonio Villaraigosa, former Speaker of the California Assembly, two-term mayor of Los Angeles, fellow at Harvard and the Bipartisan Policy Institute, professor of public policy at USC.
How are you?
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Come on, let's talk. So, how's it going?
It's going. How are you?
Good, good. You're 8 of 9 interviews that I've done today, so we're getting through them.
So you're exhausted.
You know, I am invigorated because I know you have energy, and you have the energy to do this job as governor. So why don't you tell us, what are you going to do?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to see all of you with these lights. I can't see you, but I know you're there. What am I going to do? I think it's time for a grown-up, frankly. I think it's time for someone that understands this is a great state, a state that's given me more than I could have ever imagined growing up in a single-family household, a home of domestic violence and alcoholism. I tell people, never in my wildest imagination did I think I'd be sitting in a seat like this. But it's also a state with big challenges. And the biggest challenge is the challenge of affordability. The fact of the matter is, this state is too expensive. It used to be that homeownership was part of the American dream. And now for our kids, it's 3 roommates and a crowded apartment. And for too many families, it's 2 and 3 families to an apartment in this state. We have the highest gas price in the United States of America, and we produce the cleanest fuel. We have the second highest utility costs, gone up 60% in the last 6 years. We have the second highest home prices, and people can't afford this state. And I believe that we need a governor who's going to make the tough calls. You know, when I was mayor, LA was one of the most violent big cities in America. By the time I left with New York, it was the safest big city in America, 48% drop in violent crime. 1 out of 3 schools were failing. By the time I left, it was a 60% increase in the graduation rate. #1 American city in reducing carbon emissions, #5 in the world, and built more infrastructure than anybody in the United States of America. But not only that, we were in the middle of a recession. Wall Street downgraded our bond rating. They said we were going bankrupt. I left us on a sound financial footing, making the tough calls. We need somebody to make the tough calls. We're looking at an $18 to $30 billion deficit next year. We needed someone who's done it before. LA is bigger than San Francisco, San Jose, Oakland, and San Diego combined. It has more poverty than among the highest poverty rates of any city in the United States of America. You know, it's the job that's most like governor. And so
I do find that your background is really interesting when you take into consideration that, you know, $7.7 billion budget in Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles. You had to act as an executive over the city, and then also your depth of knowledge in the legislature because you were there for so many years. You were also Speaker of the Assembly.
Balanced 2 budgets with a surplus, with a Republican governor and a Democrat when we didn't have 2/3 vote. We had 42 and 48 votes. We were a purple state when I started out, and I spearheaded the effort to make us a blue state. And so I could tell you, we need somebody that could, you know, like Jerry Brown, someone who's been a mayor, someone who had, you know, been in Sacramento before that and knew how to make the tough calls. He left us with a $300 million surplus, biggest surplus we'd ever been left And now we're looking at an $18 billion deficit. If we hadn't had the AI boom, we would have had an $18 billion deficit this year. It went down to 3. Nobody believes it's going to continue. And so we need somebody who's got the wherewithal, the experience to take on the tough issues.
So when I look at your campaign and the way that you've kind of framed yourself versus the other candidates in this race, you really strike me as somebody who's a centrist, that is working with, is willing to work with all parts of labor, with business, in order to kind of move the California economy forward. How do you think, number one, is that frame, do you feel like that frame is correct? And if not, how would you say that you are on the political spectrum here?
I think the frame is correct, except I wouldn't call it a centrist. I'd call it a practical person. You know, I've done this job. I know what it takes. And yes, I work with everyone. You know, in addition to being a proven problem solver at the highest levels, I was a uniter. LA's 70% of LA comes from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. It's a very diverse city. There's a great deal of poverty. I was everybody's mayor. People wanted me to be the Latino mayor and the Latino speaker before that. And I understood that when you break a glass ceiling, you got to reinforce the idea that you're like everybody else. You're going to represent everybody. And that's why it wasn't difficult for me to answer the question. What would I say to Republicans who didn't vote for me? I'd say I want to work with you. Yes, we'll take on these ICE raids. They're despicable. I've never seen anything like it. People, you know, covered from head to toe like the Ku Klux Klan. That's not the middle. That is not centrist. That is right-wing efforts to, you know, to undermine our economy and terrorize our communities. So I'd call it more practical. I'm someone that understands that this is a pro-worker state, and it should be, and I came out of the unions. I'm supportive of that. But you can't be pro-worker if you're not pro-business, because it's business that grows the economy. And the next governor is going to have to be both. You know, focus on growing. This is the innovation state. This is the state of entrepreneurs where we come to reinvent ourselves. We've got to unleash that talent so we don't have to just cut in the next budget, but also grow the economy.
I think that's something
and
that everybody wants
that
to
works
see.
for everyone, not just some of us.
Just absolutely, absolutely. And then, so in terms of the cost the cost of living in the state of California, which is too damn high for most everybody, the biggest component of that is housing. And so, what policies would you enact or push for as governor to help ease the housing crisis that we have in California?
Well, let me give you an example. Any of you know LA. We went from 20,000 people in downtown to 60,000 people in my 8 years. 25% of the cranes, all the cranes in the United States of America, were in LA. In the middle of a recession. I'm sorry. Apologize for that. We're in LA, 25% of the cranes. I put people to work. I focused on building 3 light rail lines, 1 busway. So what do? We've got to have an all of the above strategy. Yes, we need more homeless housing, but it can't cost $850,000 a unit. Our kids can't afford that. You know, in San Jose and in LA, we're building small, tiny houses for $100,000. I've said we need affordable as well, workforce and market rate. You need an all of the above approach. We need to address a broken California Environmental Quality Act that allows you to sue from Arizona for a project in San Francisco. What is that? For the lawyers in the room, there's a thing called standing. You don't need standing. And it's not, you can sue not just on environmental rules, you can sue if you're a company that doesn't want that company to open up an industrial site. You could sue on that because you're in competition. You can sue for a myriad of reasons. So we got to cut red tape.
Shadows. We sue over shadows.
Yes,
San
we do.
Francisco.
We got to cut red tape, address, a broken zoning in many of our cities. I mean, you all are grappling with that here in San Francisco. And when I was mayor, did the first transit-oriented development district in the United States of America, built all that light rail and housing alongside of it. Those are the smart things we got to do. ADUs, of course, but very clearly we got to build more. And I got a record on that. Built more homeless housing than the 12 years before that in the middle of a recession. Built more housing than the 12 years before that in the middle of a recession. So got a record building and also, cutting red tape.
Okay, let's talk about that. What kind of red tape did you cut in LA, and what do you think we can cut
Well, here's an
in
example.
California?
I love San Francisco food scene. I'm a foodie, and you guys got
We got a lot of good
you
food
got a
here.
great
Yeah.
food scene here. And so I'd go to San Francisco, I'd go to Chicago, I'd go to New York, I'd go to Miami and Vegas, and I'd try to bring the great chefs here to my town. They said, why would I go there? I'd never go to LA. And I said, hold it. Why are you saying that? They said, well, it's impossible to build a restaurant, to open up a restaurant. It takes 2.5 years. I went back to my staff. I said, why is that? Because there's 12 different departments that you have to go to. I brought them all in one room. We took it down to 6 months. I did that across the board. I brought in McKinsey and Boston Consulting and, put dashboards by everything, every campaign promise we had. Housing, the environment, safety, schools, across the board. That's what I'll do as governor. And these dashboards will be open to the public. You'll be able to see the progress. You'll be able to see, if we're really meeting our goals.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about energy, because that is part and parcel of the unaffordability crisis that we're having in California. Utilities, gasoline. What, as governor, would you be able to do in order to bring down the price of energy utilities?
I had a 100% record in the legislature on the environment, according to the California League of Conservation Voters. I'm the author of Carl Moyer. The Carl Moyer Act allowed California to provide grants to retrofit dirty diesel engines. It was the biggest effort to clean up the air until AB 32 and SB 32.
Where they call them gross polluters, right?
Right, and I told you what I did as mayor. Every traffic light is synchronized in LA. You wouldn't know with all the traffic we have, but every traffic light is synchronized. I did 144,000 street lamps, all LED. First city in the world. Guangzhou was the second. Planted 400,000 trees, more than any city in the United States of America. Made the port the greenest port in the world. Reduced our water consumption to 1970 levels. But I tell people, anybody that says we're going to get rid of oil and gas in the next few years, they're smoking pot. It's just not true. Norway is one of the greenest countries in the world. They produce oil and gas. That's how they pay for the greening of Norway. We need an all-of-the-above strategy. I'm the only city, the first city, big city, to take the city completely off of coal. But I tell people, yes, we're going to use natural gas as a transition fuel. Today, we produce more solar than we could use because we don't have the battery power for it. Mm-hmm. So you know what we do? We sell it, we give it away to Arizona, the excess power, give it away that we paid for. We give it away for free in the summer, and in the winter we sell it for 2 cents a kilowatt, less than we paid for it. So what do we need to do? We need to address the fact that we need to build a grid. We have 167,000 charging stations, mostly in affluent areas, by the way, and we're Democrats. So I believe that we should have it in every area. Built 167,000 charging stations in the last 10 years. We need 2 million in the next 10 years. And if we built it, we don't have the grid, everybody. Yeah. So let's build the grid. So we need an all-of-the-above approach. Look, the younger people here know this. You're never going to get to net zero without small nuclear. You're just not. Anybody that knows anything about this. So we need small nuclear. We need, yes, solar and wind. We need natural gas and hydrogen as transition fuels. Oil will be around for a while. But just remember this. Our refineries produce the cleanest fuel in the United States of America. Some people say the world. But we ship 75% of our oil from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Ecuador. It's a farce that we're actually, by closing down refineries, going green. We're not. We're bringing them on ships, which That's a haul.
Right.
You know, the ships are dirty diesel for the most part. And so we need to have a smart, all of the above approach that understands this. We've got to build again, everybody. We've got to build that grid. We've got to have an all of the above energy solution.
Okay. Last question. What is the endorsement that you were most proud of? Is it a grandchild?
Well, I'd like the San Francisco Democrats. You know, look.
Everybody would like my endorsement.
One of my sheroes is Barbara Boxer. I've known her for 35 years. I endorsed her the first time when all the guys were running, and in LA everybody was with the guys, and I was with her. I've known her for 30 years. We did America Fast Forward, the biggest effort to give cities the tools they need to build infrastructure. That was my idea. I took it to her. We took it to Obama. And next thing we did, we signed the legislation. So I'd say Barbara Boxer is the person of whom I am proudest to have her support.
Thank you very much. Antonio Villaraigosa, everyone. So good to see you. All right, and next up, yes. Okay, we're going to do speed round with Mayor Matt Mahan. He's mayor of San Jose, has worked to modernize city government, implement technology-driven solutions. He's trying to silence the competition here, guys.
Just took my mic.
All right, Mayor Matt Mahan, everyone. All right, Matt, everybody knows you here. I know you. You're still a bit of an outsider. And for those of you who are delegates in the room, because of his late entry into the race, Matt's name will not be appearing on the endorsement list.
I know, I was so bummed they wouldn't let me put my name on the ballot. So I am not here tonight to convince you to vote for me at the convention this weekend, but we have a few more months for me to earn your support when we get to June. All right, so that's my goal here tonight, is to start that conversation.
All right, so why did you jump into this very, very crowded field?
Well, Nancy, first of all, thank you for doing this and for your leadership locally. I've been so impressed watching how you are reinvigorating the party here in San Francisco, and that's my motivation statewide. I've been watching the race, listening to the candidates, having conversations in our community down in San Jose, and feeling that something was missing. I am concerned about the future of our democracy. I see rising populism on the right, a reaction and rising populism on the left, and a lot of people who, I think a lot of candidates who are trying to offer really easy answers that sound good, that are sound bites. We're just going to expand rent control and do single payer, but I haven't seen any details on how we're going to pay for it or what the implications might be. And we all know about the easy and divisive and fear-mongering answers on the right. And I think that this is a moment where we need a problem solver who, yes, will fight for our values and push back on this administration, but also knows that the best resistance is delivering results. Holding ourselves in California with all of our resources, our very high taxes and very progressive tax structure, accountable for delivering better outcomes with the resources we have before we ask people to pay more. And I think on public education, housing, public safety, homelessness, and on, we have been failing to deliver. And as Democrats, we have to own that and hold ourselves accountable for doing better, which is what we've been doing in San Jose. And I want to do that statewide with all of you.
So you were born and raised in a working class family. Your dad was a unionized letter carrier, your mom a teacher. In many ways, I think a lot of Californians can relate to that. What else from your background informs the way that you want to govern California?
Thanks for the question. The thing that I would focus on is the transformative power of education. When it was time for me to go to high school, our local public high school had a higher dropout rate than graduation rate. And my mom, who'd grown up in San Jose, encouraged me to look at schools on the other side of the hill, the other side of the mountain range. And I got into this great Jesuit high school, but we couldn't afford it. And they gave me a work-study scholarship. They said, if you work on the grounds crew, we will pay your tuition. We'll cover your tuition. So I took public buses about 2 hours each way every day over the mountain range to get an education. And it changed my life. So much so that when I graduated from college, I came back through Teach for America to be a teacher in Eastside, San Jose. And my biggest frustration, having been in and around education for over 20 years, my wife runs a high-performing high school on our east side serving first-generation low-income students, is that we were failing too many of our young people and not giving them pathways to be successful in our society. And we really need to look in the mirror, California, when Mississippi is doing 2.5 times better for low-income students of color than the state of California in getting kids on grade level for reading. We really have to ask ourselves, what is in the way of holding ourselves accountable for truly adopting the science of reading, better intervening and training our teachers and helping them to get better, holding our schools accountable for working together to intervene when kids are falling behind, to make them successful. This isn't rocket science. Other states, other countries are doing it. We have not been doing it.
So let me ask you the question back. What is in our way?
Frankly, I think it's complacency. I think we have not, inside the party, been willing to have the tough conversations with some of our biggest stakeholders, including our teachers' unions. And the truth is, while testing can be limiting and oversimplified, we should be assessing kids' learning growth. We should allow those at the top of the class to run ahead and pursue their curiosity and their passion and not teach to the lowest common denominator. When kids fall behind, we should invest in high-dosage tutoring because it works. In San Jose, we're investing in it, and it's helping kids catch up. And most importantly, when we assess student learning and benchmark against other cohorts, we need to reward and celebrate the teachers who consistently have their kids outperforming and turn them into our mentors and coaches. And for the teachers who aren't, it's not about punishing them, but we should look at that data and use it to give them high quality feedback and help them to learn and grow and treat them like the professionals that they are, because the work they're doing is just as important as lawyers and doctors and many other professional roles in our society, but we don't treat it as such in practice. And it's a hard conversation to have with our friends in organized labor, but having been in the CTA, having been a teacher, the conversation is long overdue and we can do better.
So I think there's been a lot of media attention around your successes as mayor in San Jose around homelessness and your ability to reduce the number of homeless individuals or people, unhoused individuals, by 20% in the city.
Almost a third.
Almost a third. Sorry about.
Crime is down over 20%.
Okay,
but
well,
yeah.
So take that and tell us what you would do on the statewide scale to help us grapple with the homelessness crisis statewide.
Yeah. Thank you. We have to take a data-driven approach, and I'm sorry to be such a nerd about it, but when I came into office, we had different departments working in silos, spending a lot of money, pursuing disparate strategies, and we weren't really moving the needle. And we took them out of different departments, co-located them on the same floor, and said every day, face-to-face in person, we're going to do a stand-up meeting, we're going to actually set up sprints, we're going to take a data-driven approach and hold ourselves accountable for moving people indoors faster. And the truth is, at $1 million a door, and 6 or 7 years to build a brand new permanent supportive housing unit, we were not scaling the solution to meet the need as we had thousands of people living on our streets. So we found more pragmatic solutions, and I want to just quickly list them because there's never a single silver bullet. It's usually a few different things that work. One, we've doubled down on our prevention system with our county, which is best in the nation. Short-term rental assistance paired with case management to prevent someone from becoming homeless, because it's so much better to spend $5,000 stabilizing someone and helping them get to something more sustainable than spend $50,000 a year managing unsheltered homelessness on the streets. There's a huge amount of human suffering involved in that as well that we should be preventing. Number two, rather than $1 million a door and 6 years to build, we shifted prefabricated modular units on publicly owned land, buying old motels and fixing them up into transitional and interim housing, and more engagement and accountability on our streets. Outreach that we brought in-house so we had better quality control, and law enforcement, but in a humane way. And I want to be clear about this because there's been some confusion about it. We do not criminalize homelessness in San Jose. No one goes to jail for being homeless. But when someone is repeatedly refusing to come indoors, and we've scaled up interim housing and shelter more than any other city on the West Coast, which is why we've also had the greatest drop in homelessness. But when someone repeatedly refuses over and over and over again, we use a brief, humane interaction with the criminal justice system to refer someone to a drug court or a behavioral health court to help them get the help that they need. And as governor, what I would do is coordinate a statewide framework for getting every city to expand shelter, interim housing, and remove barriers to building the long-term permanent and affordable housing we need, and get every county to build the inpatient treatment and residential treatment beds that we need. And when they are available, intervene in cycles of addiction and mental illness to help people come indoors. Most people will come indoors when offered a dignified alternative, but some will not. And those are the folks who are the most vulnerable, most likely to die on our streets. We've had 50,000 people die on our streets in the last 10 years, and we have not treated it like the humanitarian crisis that it is. We're starting to in San Jose, which is why we have about 1/3 fewer people living outside, and it's continuing to come down because we've gotten really practical about scaling up solutions and getting people indoors.
All right, last question. What does the future of California look like under a Governor Mahan?
You know, the biggest thing that I want to do is restore trust in government. And I know that sounds abstract, but I believe our democracy is at risk from rising populism on the right and the left. And in San Jose, by getting back to basics, by picking a few foundational things, reducing unsheltered homelessness, accelerating the production of housing, getting more home building going, supporting our job creators and supporting small business, cleaning up our neighborhoods, addressing crime, by really getting back to basics and delivering results that people feel and see in their daily lives. Trust in City Hall in the last 3 years is up by nearly 40%. And I think that the way the state can move forward is not by boiling the ocean, not trying to solve every problem at once, not promise to be everything to everyone, and certainly not recycling the same old things we've been doing for years, but pick a few key issues. For me, those would be building a lot more housing so that families can afford to live here, ending the crisis of unsheltered homelessness and all that goes with it, which includes investments in addiction and mental health care, improving our public schools so that every child is prepared to be successful into the world in which they enter as they leave our school system. If we focus, set goals, are publicly accountable to you, yes, through dashboards where you can actually track if we're getting better on the metrics that really matter to our future prosperity, I believe we will deliver better outcomes in those foundational areas. And in the process, we will rebuild a belief in our democratic process and real problem solving and move away from the performative, hyper-partisan, divisive politics that is tearing our country apart. And California can lead the way. It doesn't mean sacrificing our progressive values, but it means demonstrating in practice that our values can deliver real results and expand prosperity and opportunity and quality of life for everyone. That should be our mission as a state.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Nancy.
All right.